Axios is just the beginning.
Happy Convention Week and welcome to an Axios virtual event. And welcome to my home. I'm Mike Allen, a co-founder of Axios, and we're excited to have you here for these conversations about America's road ahead. We appreciate the Bank of America for making these conversations possible. And thank you for tuning in on YouTube, on Axios.com, through the Axios Twitter account at Axios, hashtag Axios events, and through Facebook. We'd love to have this conversation every day. I'd love for you to check out my newsletters, Axios AM and PM. You can get all of the Axios newsletters at signup.axios.com, signup.axios.com. To kick things off, earlier this week, I got to sit down with the Secretary of Housing and Urban Development, Secretary Ben Carson, also a longtime doctor who's on the President's COVID task force. And right after that conversation, we'll hear a word from the Bank of America. Secretary Ben Carson, the President's Secretary of Housing and Urban Development. You think being in the cabinet is a high-stakes job? For 30 years, Dr. Carson was a pediatric neurosurgeon. Secretary Carson, welcome to Axios.
Thank you. Glad to be with you.
Secretary Carson, your personal story is very inspiring. You've always been one of the conservative movement's most popular speaker. And right now, you're making the case that even in the COVID era, we're seeing prosperity in America. And something big that you point to is opportunity zones.
Yes, in fact, the Council of Economic Advisors today put out its report on opportunity zones, demonstrating about $75 billion having come into qualified opportunity funds. When the program was envisioned, Secretary Mnuchin and his group predicted that it would take in $100 billion over 10 years. We're talking $75 billion over only 2 years. And the council also projected that 1 million people will be lifted out of poverty just at this point in time. And that obviously will continue to expand. And that in the opportunity zones, poverty will decrease in general by about 11%. And when you look at some of the immediate benefits, as soon as an area is named an opportunity zone, the property values increase by about 1.1%. That's $11 billion of additional wealth for people who live there, because about half of people actually own their property. So there are some significant benefits. And then you look at some of the projects that are going on. In Phoenix, Arizona, for instance, a rehab center that was boarded up and not being used, being reconverted with a $22 million infusion from an opportunity fund and made into a behavioral clinic for people who normally would be out on the street creating all kinds of problems. And, those are the kinds of people that we need to be helping. That also provides about 80 high-paying jobs. And it looks like over the course of the 10-year period, we'll have a 2.5x return. So these are the kinds of things that are win-win situations. There are multiple of them all over the country.
And Secretary Carson, there are some fancy blocks that were also named opportunity zones. Explain to our viewers why it benefits them if there's an opportunity zone in their community or near them.
Well, the opportunity zones are chosen by the governors of the 50 states and the 5 territories. And so the federal government tried to pretty much stay out of selecting what the zones are, with the understanding that those governors should know which are the areas that are most economically deprived and that would benefit the most. In the process of doing that, some of the zones have areas in them that contain some not disadvantaged areas. And there are some who've tried to make a big deal out of that and make you think that all of them are like that. That's a very small minority, and it's part of the inability to absolutely trim the margins of the zone.
Secretary Carson, you travel the country, you see a lot of America. As you know, a lot of America is hurting. Is it tough for you to come in as a cabinet official, like fancy with the detail, and explain to people that their life actually is better?
No, most people seem to actually recognize that. Uh, when we go to places like a couple of weeks ago, we were in Tampa, and a 12-block area being restored, 500 units of housing, uh, economic development going on in there, a museum, an African American museum, a church being converted to that museum historically. All those kinds of things, people were delighted to be a part of it and quite proud going on. You go to St. Louis, an abandoned foundry there became the nidus of revitalization with workforce housing, grocery stores, entertainment, the whole gamut of things, which then brings in further development. But one of the things you have to recognize about the program is the benefits for the investors tend to be more long term. You have to leave that initial investment in for 5 years before you get a 10% decrement in the capital gains owed on the initial investment. You leave it in for 2 more years, you get 15%. You leave it in for a full 10 years, you don't have to pay any capital gains on the new money that was realized as a result of that investment. So those are significant, obviously. But the important thing about that is people are not going to come back 5, 7, and 10 years and see how their investment's doing. They're going to stay involved because they want to maximize their return on investment.
Secretary Carson, with your doctor hat on, you've been a member of the president's COVID-19 task force. You've been literally at the table. Most recently, there have been questions about whether the president is rushing the process of treatments or vaccines. Like, how do you think that should be balanced? Speed versus trust?
Well, I think it's extremely important to put things in perspective. We're in the middle of a pandemic. That is not necessarily the time to take everything slowly. That's the time to maximize your resources, not to skip steps, but to move expeditiously. And if you have something that is safe or relatively safe, and that you have anecdotal evidence that is very effective, it would behoove you to move forward with testing, not with putting it out, not with making it available to people, but with testing. And rather than just leave that process languishing, I think what the president is saying is, look, folks, this is not normal times. We need to move forward. We can't just sit around and lollygag in a time like that. I think that's what he's saying. And part of the announcement yesterday with the use of convalescent plasma indicated that maybe this was not going to be business as usual. Maybe we would look to expedite, not skip steps, but expedite steps to make sure we rapidly get these things out, because you have to recognize that we want to open the economy back up. We want people to stop being afraid of everything. And that will happen when we have some effective therapies, when we have an effective vaccine. So we certainly don't want to impede or slow down that process. We want to speed that process up. That would only make sense.
And Secretary Carson, sitting at that table as a physician with a bunch of politicians, what's the most important thing you've been able to add to their thinking? Or what has been the theme of the points that you've tried to make to the Pauls around the table with you?
Well, I've steadfastly resisted talking about confidential information in the task force or in the Oval Office, and I'll maintain that. But I will say we have wide-ranging discussions about a lot of things. And I think everybody brings something to the table that sometimes other people haven't thought about. And we have an opportunity to discuss those things openly, and I think that makes a big difference.
Secretary Carson, you've written 9 books. I mentioned you're a very popular speaker. You're going to be speaking at the Republican National Convention. Something you've told me is that when you speak, you like to try to make people think. Like, what do you do to try to make people think in this era where there's more talking, less thinking?
Well, I frequently will bring up things from my own history. People tend to relate to things in someone's story as opposed to just some philosophical points that are brought forward. And, I try to remind people also about the history of our nation. This is really quite a special place. And, the people who are always denigrating it and talking about how horrible it is, I'm all ears. If they know of a better place, please let me know where it is. So far, I haven't seen it, and I've traveled to 68 different countries, and I've lived overseas. We live in a country that provides lots of opportunities, but is inhabited by imperfect people. Always has been inhabited by imperfect people. Therefore, it is not a perfect country. But rather than throwing out the baby with the bathwater, what we should do is try to learn from the mistakes of the past, not try to bury them and deny that they occurred. But let's learn from them and move forward. That seems to be what intelligent people would do.
And Secretary Carson, as we say goodbye, we always like to end on a light note with an out-of-work passion. And a little bird tells me that when you're out of work, you actually are a pool sharp.
I do play pretty well, actually. What's interesting is that my wife is actually a very good pool player. And she didn't play pool at all when we got married. But she said, if I'm going to spend quality time with you, I better become a pool player. And now she's very good. If I make a mistake, she will win the game. So I have to be very careful when I play her. And we play 3 games every night. She says, that's as many as I can lose and still be a nice person.
Secretary Carson, one quick pool tip. I need it.
Keep your balancing hand close to the ball. The further you put it away from the ball, the less control you have of the stick.
News you can use, and maybe even a lesson for life. Secretary Ben Carson, thank you very much for joining Axios.
It's always a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. We'd like to thank Bank of America for making these conversations possible. And now a quick video from the Bank of America.
The racial and economic disparities that have long existed in this country have only been widened by the coronavirus and amplified by the most recent acts of injustice. People around the world are coming together with greater urgency to demand action. At Bank of America, we know we all have a role to play to overcome the very real consequences of systemic racism and inequity. This includes individuals, governments, nonprofits, and the private sector. Racial equality and economic opportunity are deeply connected. That's why Bank of America has committed $1 billion over 4 years to address critical gaps in affordable housing, access to healthcare, employment and job skills, and the resources small businesses need to succeed. We can do more, and we need to do more now to further advance racial equality and economic opportunity for all.
Thank you to the Bank of America for making these conversations about America's road ahead possible. Our next guest, the mayor of Miami, Francis Suarez, the first mayor of Miami who was actually born in Miami, raising 2 children there, was a Miami commissioner before he took the mayor's office. Mayor Suarez, welcome to Axios.
Oh, it's a wonderful and a pleasure to be with you.
Mayor, over many years, I've heard you talk about resiliency in cities, and now you're Miami, and you're suddenly having to cope with an economy where cruises have been disrupted, tourism have been disrupted. 2 of your pillars. Like, how are you faring? What have you learned in this disruptive moment?
We've learned so much about how to deal with disruption. You have to understand, too, that Miami, and we're in the midst of hurricane season. So the first, one of the major disruptors of our city was our climatic issues, whether it's hurricanes, dry day flooding, or more than usual annual rainfall. Our climate has been one of our disruptors, but also, a lot of major American cities across the country are dealing with inequity and economic disruptions. Obviously, COVID has not just been a healthcare disruption, but it's been a tremendous economic disruption. And as you said, industries like tourism and cruise industry are industries that require, tremendous amount of aggregation of people, where it's a crowd-based economy. And so for us, it's a particular challenge that we're going to have to deal with going forward.
Now, Mayor, the COVID cases in Miami, as I understand it, are headed the right way. You have outdoor dining now. How soon will I be able to dine indoors in Miami?
I think very soon. I was never a big fan of the indoor dining ban because we had not yet established through contact tracing that was a major issue. We saw places like Broward never really lift the indoor dining issue ban. They never implemented an indoor dining ban, and they have a lower positivity rate than Dade County. So I think the fact that the mask in public, which for me was one of my major policy positions that I felt would really get the virus under control, has really had, to me, the main effect, and that's something that we've enforced heavily with teams of enforcement teams that have fined people who are not wearing a mask in public. And we've seen the number plummet since we've implemented the mask in public rule. And we're hopeful that that will continue to happen over the coming weeks. But we just had yesterday, for a few days ago, we had 500 new cases per day. And that's a significant drop. That's something that we haven't seen for a few months.
Mayor, you have such an amazing city. So I'll tell you a little story about a family tradition. So I have 11 nieces and nephews, 8 boys. Wow. And we have a tradition that on New Year's Eve, we all get together and usually go to a football game. And twice, we've gotten the whole family, 20-some of us, together on South Beach. And what I love about Miami is that you feel the diversity of food, of music. It's concentrated in a way that it isn't even in my native Southern California.
No doubt. I think it's one of our strengths, our diversity, and the fact that, like I said, we're a place where people come and they congregate. And that's what makes a virus like this so difficult, because it changes a little bit of the DNA of our city. And it forces us to have to adjust. And we're making those adjustments. And we've had a very, very high utilization of the masks in public, which I think is what's driven down, like I said, the positivity rate. And look, I think we're not going to be dealing with COVID forever, thankfully. We are going to have to wear the mask for a few months, I think, for a few more months. But I do think there will come a point where we get back to that set of normalcy. I think for me, what's been a tremendous lesson is understanding how unprepared we were as a society to deal with a pandemic like this. And I think there are things that we're going to have to do significantly better going forward, particularly if the next virus that hits us is one that's much more deadly.
Mr. Mayor, as we think about the road ahead for America and for our big cities, something that you've been big on for a long time is connectivity. What are your worries about that? And what are the opportunities for a big city like yours?
It's something that I've spent a lot of time focused on, and I think it'll be interesting to see how connectivity is influenced in a post-COVID world. We now have the ability ubiquitously to communicate and to be connected virtually as opposed to in person. And I think a lot of the pre-COVID connectivity was in-person connectivity, traveling, air travel, or traveling, getting across the city and the county. And that's something that may change. It's also going to affect, to what extent we need office space. And so what's incredible about these disruptive events is that they not only disrupt our economy, but they disrupt markets. We saw, obviously with Uber and Lyft, how they disrupted an entire industry of taxi cabs. So, when you see something like this and people are forced to use different kinds of technologies, even school has been internet-based, it's interesting to see, how things that we were going to spend billions of dollars on in terms of creating mass transit may be influenced by the ability to ubiquitously communicate through the internet.
Mr. Mayor, a big worry in America's cities this summer is public safety. And we just saw the tragedy in Kenosha, Wisconsin. We've had such a ripple of those inexplicable events. Something where you innovated, pioneered when you were a Miami commissioner was you led the installation of a shot spotter technology, and police in a lot of big cities have told me what a game changer this is. It's gun detection technology. What did you learn from that might be able to help other cities?
We were an early adopter, something that I was very proud. I'm sort of a techie public official, and I love to use technology, to provide better services and leverage our resources. And when we brought ShotSpotter in, we basically saw that the fact that we had real-time data on every single gunfire incident in our city that I knew and that I still know, whenever a gun is fired in my city with GPS precision, it saves us about a minute to 2 minute of lead times from a 911 call. It gives us precision as to where the incident event occurred so that we can get there quickly, and we can either save the person's life if they've been shot, or collect evidence and ballistic information, or set up a perimeter or try to catch the person. So we've seen our homicide rate drop precipitously since then. And as mayor, I could tell you my first 3 years as mayor, every single year we've had a lower homicide rate. We had a 50-year low my first year, and that number has continued to plummet year after year.
Mr. Mayor, you're a proud Republican, and as part of this series, we're talking about the road ahead also for the Republican Party in conjunction with the convention. And you've been a proud Republican since you were 18, and you also are very conscious of the environment. You've really been pushing the party. How can the Republican Party evolve to get more people who look like you and are your age to join the party?
I think we have to stop ceding ground on issues that are important issues to my generation. I think the environment is one of them. I mean, the environment obviously is one where, potholes, I always say, are not Republican or Democrat, and sea level rise, which is something that we're seeing in our city, and environmental impacts that we're seeing in our city have a huge economic impact. And so, I think the Republican Party shouldn't abandon an issue like that, and they should integrate. And we're seeing that in our city by creating hopefully what will be the most water resilient city on the planet. And that's something that Republicans shouldn't give up. I think immigration is another one. I mean, my parents emigrated to this country from Cuba. So I'm the product of immigration, and every single American essentially is an immigrant from somewhere. And that's part of what makes our country great. And like you were talking about in terms of the diversity, when you come and visit Miami. So Miami, I think, is a microcosm of what the United States looks like and will look like over the course of the next few decades. And so I think we should embrace the fact that we are a country of immigrants, and that's something that should strengthen us, not something that we should vilify.
Yeah, no question that Miami is where America is heading all over. Mr. Mayor, we're getting the hook, but before we say goodbye, we always like to ask our newsmaker about an out-of-work passion. And you eat a lot more healthily than I do. What's a tip for us about how we can look like you?
Exercise. You gotta. I'm vegan, so I don't eat meat or dairy, and I don't drink. I haven't drank in a long time. So and I don't drink coffee. So that's the secret. I've sort of haven't been totally strict on all of those things throughout the last year, but I think having that as a base is something that can help you be healthier.
And Mr. Mayor, just asking on behalf of our viewers at home, what is something that you consume that's pleasurable?
I love having the Beyond Burgers now. A lot of really good plant-based burgers that are excellent, and something that I really enjoy.
Mayor Suarez, thank you very much for joining Axios.
Thanks, Mike.
Thank you, sir. We appreciate the Bank of America for making these America's Road Ahead conversations possible. And now we're going to see a quick video from the Bank of America.
The racial and economic disparities that have long existed in this country have only been widened by the coronavirus and amplified by the most recent acts of injustice. People around the world are coming together with greater urgency to demand action. At Bank of America, we know we all have a role to play to overcome the very real consequences of systemic racism and inequity. This includes individuals, governments, nonprofits, and the private sector. Racial equality and economic opportunity are deeply connected. That's why Bank of America has committed $1 billion over 4 years to address critical gaps in affordable housing, access to healthcare, employment and job skills, and the resources small businesses need to succeed. We can do more, and we need to do more now to further advance racial equality and economic opportunity for all.
We'd like to thank the Bank of America for making these conversations possible. And now, batting cleanup, Ronna McDaniel, RNC chairwoman of the Republican National Committee, the second woman to hold that job. All politics is local. I used to know Chairwoman McDaniel when she was in Michigan, and she turned Michigan into Donald Trump country. Ronna McDaniel, welcome to Axios.
I'm so happy to be with you. Thanks for having me, Mike.
So I don't recognize you with your big gavel that you had when you called the convention to order in Charlotte. You looked like you were having fun.
I know, I love that gavel. I'm not going to lie. I felt like Thor a little bit from the Avenger movies. Kevin McCarthy got a gavel too, so we were both laughing backstage. But it was great to be in Charlotte and see our delegates and be in person. I'm missing so many of the RNC members. And the highlight, of course, was having the vice president and the president surprise them as much as they can, because, of course, it's hard for them to really surprise with their movements. But to have them show up and thank them in person, a lot of planning had gone into Charlotte. And it was special also for the city, because we love the city of Charlotte. We'd spent a lot of time there. And it worked out great. And now we're 2 days in, and I still haven't slept.
So political conventions have been pretty conventional as long as you or I have been alive. You reinvented conventions on the fly. What would you say you've learned about what matters in this social mobile COVID era? And what do you hope people remember from these 4 days?
You know, as we were going through the decision to cancel Jacksonville, where we had planned on doing more of an in-person convention with thousands of people, and the president and I got on the phone, and we just really felt that, and the president felt, this is not the right time to be taking resources from a city dealing with COVID. We don't want to take away testing. We don't want to put anybody at risk, including our delegates. We had, I think, 60 days or 90 days or 70 days to turn it all around. And what I've learned is you have to have a great team. Everybody just jumped in. Laura Trump has been critical. Tony Saya, I'd say Hope Hicks too, just making sure we're getting the president's time scheduled for things. I mean, it's everybody. It's all hands on deck. And I like the virtual convention, but I'm not going to lie. I miss the in-person conventions with the crowd and all the delegates, because I'm a grassroots chair and I really loved going to conventions, but I think it's going incredibly well. The most important thing is we're talking about the accomplishments of this president and sharing it through the eyes of real people. And I think that's the special part of this convention, that we're getting an up-close look at these individuals and their stories, the American story, and how it relates to President Trump and why he deserves another 4 years.
And what Democrats will say is these 4 days are very different from some of the policy, some of the tone. Frank Bruni in the New York Times said it was more science fiction than reality show. Can 4 days change permanent impressions?
I think it can. I disagree with the New York Times. How can it be science fiction when it's real accounts from real people telling their stories? So I think that was part of our calculus as well, is you can't really argue with a lobsterman from Maine or a farmer from Wisconsin or a child who benefited from Right to Try or a businesswoman who, because of PPP loans, was able to keep her business open. I mean, these are real stories. So I think what I'm hearing from people is, thank you for sharing these stories. I never knew this had happened. I never known that the president had these hostages released during his term. All these stories we're sharing, frankly, the media should have been sharing, and we're getting to showcase them every night. And I think people like the New York Times and others are going nuts because they haven't shared these stories. And it shows a little bit of a dereliction of duty that they haven't shared stories like these because of their overriding dislike for President Trump.
Madam Chair, take us behind the scenes. So after the president was officially renominated on Monday, you hopped on a plane. Little Bird says you actually rewrote your remarks on the plane. Then you were the first person to speak live down here on Constitution Avenue in the Mellon Center, that big cavernous room that we've seen with all the flags. Tell us what it's like to orate in an empty auditorium.
Yeah, it was. I'm not going to lie. I was intimidated. I was so busy with the RNC meeting and the business of the convention, and people don't see all the behind the scenes, Robert's rules and gaveling and the procedures you have to know. And then I did take off my dress the first thing I could and put on some comfy clothes so we could fly back to DC and get here as quickly as possible. But we did rewrite the script or my talk on the plane. I had been mulling things over in my head the night before, and I just said, I want to rewrite the whole thing, and showed up to the Mellon, and it's just a huge room. And I think the thing people don't realize is nobody's in there on your team. They keep it kind of empty, except for photographers in front of you clicking the whole time you're speaking, and then a camera on a jib arm going up and down while you're speaking. So it was a little intimidating. Under the circumstances, I think I did okay, but I'm not going to lie. I was really happy when it was over, and I'm really glad I didn't, throw up on stage.
Now, Madam Chair, the RNC has 7,500 in-person political training sessions coming up. And this is a bit of a contrast with the Biden campaign. Like, they're more virtual. They're intentionally setting examples, sending a message about behavior in the COVID era. You talked about the in-person fun in Charlotte. You're going to have live human organizing. What's your thinking about that? And do you have any qualms about bringing together all these hardworking young people?
Well, we're doing it in a healthy and safe way, just like we did in Charlotte. We used PPE. We followed the guidelines being pushed forward. We use social distancing. Dr. Fauci has said voting in person is okay. It causes no problems. We're all going to the grocery store. Many of us are continuing to have to live our lives, but we're being told to do it following the guidelines being put forward. And this is the same with our ground game. We have 2 million volunteers activated. We have 2,000 staff on the ground. We're knocking 1 million doors a week. And the Biden campaign has chosen to go completely virtual, not just with their candidate being in his basement the whole campaign, but no ground game, no knocking doors. And here's the difference, Mike, that I believe. As you're seeing these stories every night in this convention, and it feels like a one-to-one conversation where you say, did you know what the president did for the lobstermen here in Maine? Do you know what USMCA has done for farmers in Wisconsin? When that door knocker is from that neighborhood and they're able to connect with that voter on a personal level and bypass the noise, that's how you change votes. And I think that's going to be critical heading into Election Day. We already see on C-SPAN, they've had several voters call in and say, I'm switching. I'm going from Democrat to Republican because of this convention, because we're humanizing the policies. We're connecting with the American people because that is what President Trump cares about. The average hardworking American who's going to work every single day, figuring out how to live paycheck to paycheck, how to survive through this pandemic. And it's really elite for Joe Biden and Democrats to think they can run a completely virtual campaign with him in the basement and then say to the American people, we want you all to shut down. We want to shut it down again. That's not realistic. People can't do that. Only Hollywood celebrities can do that and privileged politicians. But average Americans, we've got to go back to work. And that's the difference between the vision Donald Trump's putting forward right now and Joe Biden.
Penultimate question, Madam Chair. You maybe saw that this week, Secretary Clinton said on The Circus that Joe Biden shouldn't concede under any circumstances because of the shenanigans or the changes that might happen as late votes come in. What did you think when you saw that?
I think there should be an uproar. I think there should be an uproar from the Democrat media that attacks Donald Trump anytime he says anything about mail-in voting. If I had said that the president shouldn't accept the results of election, it would be wall-to-wall coverage. Hillary Clinton is the one who accused then candidate Trump of being someone who would refuse to accept the results of the 2016 election. She cautioned against the refusal of a peaceful transfer of power. And here she is advocating for chaos in our democracy. I think it is shameful. She should be called out. The media should be calling her out. I'd like to just not hear from her anymore for a while. She lost. She lost because she ran a bad campaign and she forgot the middle of America. And she lost because Donald Trump connected with a forgotten man that Democrats don't care about anymore. Those deplorables actually do vote. And for her to say that is egregious. And I wish she was getting the backlash that a conservative would get if they said the same thing.
As we say goodbye, you've been a precinct delegate. You're now the RNC chair. When you're home, you drive carpool. You mentioned a couple of your teenagers. You've had, I think, at least one of your daughters with you here in DC. We're in the Rose Garden for the First Lady's speech. What's that been like to share that with your daughter, with your children?
So my kids are different. You know, one of my son could care less. He's just like, Mom, where are you? I need to get to McDonald's. Why aren't you home? And my daughter is a little more politically in tune. She was pretty in awe last night to see the First Lady, somebody she admires tremendously. So, you know, I'm just mom when I go home. I think the group chat for my son is Ronna's kids. So I'm just getting pizza and doing laundry, and they don't even know who the RNC chair is. And I like it that way. I was saying to somebody earlier, you know, during this shutdown, I became an expert on PowerPoint because my son had a business tech class. And I've got great kids, and I'm living a life like a lot of working moms right now, trying to balance how do I have my kids in school when my husband and I both work and they're virtual and not going to school. And it's a struggle that a lot of families are dealing with right now. And I'm no exception.
That's the ultimate. All politics is local. Mom, take me to McDonald's. Madam Chair, thank you for joining Axios.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Thank the Bank of America for making these America's Road Ahead conversations possible during the conventions. Thank all of you for joining us in whatever your shutdown, lockdown mode was. And exciting news, we're going to have a 5-part America's Road Ahead series coming out of these conventions built around the debates, culminating after the election. So I will see you on the road, and I will see you on Axios.com.